Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Southern Indiana's newest city. That's the city of Austin, Indiana. And as mayor of this city, I want to personally thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule today and coming here and helping Austin celebrate this historic event. You know, there's a lot of things that we can do together, and we're better together, and this is a perfect example of that. We had a short notice on this event, and I will tell you, it's come together very, very nicely. I thank each and every person that had any part in putting this together. I know the firemen worked very, very hard on that, and we need to show them that we do deeply appreciate that. You know, I can remember one time Hillary Clinton made the statement that it takes a village to raise a child, and I agreed with that, it does, and I've used that many times. She also made another statement that I thoroughly agree with, and what she said was that in order to keep America strong, each and every individual small community throughout the United States needs to be strong. And I will tell you, Austin is strong and getting stronger because today's a perfect example of that. Thank you. At this time, I'll turn it over to the president of he's actually the fire chief of Jennings Township Volunteer Fire Department, Mike Campbell.
I'd like to welcome everyone here. Again, my name is Mike Campbell, chief of Jennings Township Volunteer Fire Department. I'm glad to be here at this time. Chelsea Clinton.
Oh gosh. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Oh gosh, please sit down. Thank you for the warm welcome here in Austin. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Campbell, and thank you all for being here. And I just want to echo what the mayor said. I know that these events always take a lot of work, and so I appreciate everyone who has helped us all be here together today, and particularly to the fire department. So thank you very much. I'm excited to be in Austin. I'm excited to be here to talk with you all about why I so passionately support my mom, not only because she is my mom, but also as a young voter and as an American. I fundamentally believe that my mother's the strongest and the most prepared candidate and would be the best president of not only anyone who's running, but of anyone that I could imagine. So I'd like to talk with you all today in the context of what's important to you and your families and your friends, your colleagues, your community here at Austin, but what's important to you about why I so believe that to be true. So I hope that you'll ask questions that you are talking about with your friends and your families that you know are critical in this election. I hope for those of you who are already supporting my mom that you'll ask questions too so that I can help each of you be the best advocate for my mom that you can be. And if people aren't comfortable asking a question in this format, well, I hope you'll still reach out for answers. I hope you'll go online to hillaryclinton.com. I hope you'll watch clips of the debates. There now have been 21 debates among the Democrats and just a few fewer than that among the Republicans. And if people aren't comfortable asking questions, I'm happy to just pick issues that I've been hearing are on people's minds in Indiana as I've been traveling now throughout Indiana for the last few weeks. But I'll see if anybody has a question. I hope people will ask. You don't have to be a voter yet. You can ask a question if you're not yet a voter. Okay, well, oh yes, yeah. Please. For family and medical leave. Well, my mother has already worked to expand family and medical leave as a senator to extend to our veterans' families. So our veterans' families actually can now take advantage of the same provisions under the Family and Medical Leave Act that people who are caring for loved ones who are sick can do. And she has committed to extending family and medical leave for employers with 25 employees, which would affect about 13 million Americans. So she has already been working to reform and expand the Family Medical Leave Act It's a great question. You're the first person that's ever asked me about the Family Medical Leave Act. And I've now, goodness, probably answered 1,800 or 1,900 questions around our country, and you're the first person who's asked me that. And it's something that I'm really proud of my dad for signing. That was the first piece of legislation he signed when he was president. And I'm really proud for all my mom's done to already expand and extend it. Thank you very much. Other questions? Yes. Well, as a first-time voter, well, it's great that you're voting. Oh gosh, no. But what advice would I give you? Well, to get informed. I mean, one of the things that I think is so great about this election is how much information there is that's accessible from the candidates and the campaigns themselves. So without the filter of our friends in the back, that you can reach out directly and see where my mom stands on the issues that are important to you, to see not only what her vision is, but the very specific policies and plans she's articulating to get there, to see what her relevant experience is so that you can have the confidence that she'll really deliver on what she's talking about. Yeah, thank you very much. Yes. Does my mom have thoughts on paid maternity leave? Yes, she has thoughts on both paid maternity and paternity leave. She believes that we need to do a better job of supporting our families, and particularly supporting women who are pregnant and women who have children who want to work in the workplace. So supporting an expansion of paid maternity leave, also paid paternity leave, having tax credits so that companies who are willing to set up programs for preschool or after-school programs or daycare programs, that at least those would be cost neutral for companies. So not requiring companies to do that, but enabling it to be cost neutral for small businesses or large businesses if they're willing to do that, so that women are able to be confident that their kids are being well cared for while they're at work. So absolutely a lot to support women who would be working with children, or women who would be expecting children. Yeah, thank you. Yes, ma'am. Yep. Could you hear her question? No, so her question is, she's a real estate agent, and in her county, they're seeing every month higher rates of people who are defaulting on their mortgages or even home foreclosures. And so what is my mom going to do to help our housing crisis more generally? Well, my mom said we were going to have a housing crisis last March, well before, most pundits, much less even politicians, were talking about that. She said, we're going to have a housing crisis and we need to do something about that. Something I really want out of my president, someone who sees the writing on the wall. And so she came out with a very specific plan to confront our housing crisis, but the Bush administration was unreceptive to that. In fact, even though the Bush administration has now acknowledged that we could have 1 to 2 million American families in foreclosure this year, it still hasn't acted. So what has my mom been trying to do now for months in the Senate, and what she's talking about on this campaign? Well, one, to have a 90-day moratorium on home foreclosures so that people can work out rates that they can pay with their lenders. That's not only good to help keep Americans in their homes, that's good to help keep small lenders solvent so that they're still receiving payments. And that's good for us as taxpayers because it costs $180,000 per home foreclosure. Not where I think most of us would be choosing to spend what resources we have. And then to freeze adjustable rate mortgages for 5 years, because so many people have told my mom that they can pay the rates they're paying now, but they can't pay the higher rates they see on the horizon. And then to immediately have stricter predatory lending laws so that we're never in this situation again, and to have universal transparent mortgage standards. So if you move from Florida to Indiana, you know what type of mortgage you're getting into. But what my mom's also been pushing to do is to provide emergency funding to the communities and the cities and the counties that have been hit hardest by not only the foreclosure crisis, but also declining property values. because property tax receipts are what help fund so much of what we think of as our civic life. It's what helps fund the fire department that we're in right now. It helps what fund public schools, police departments, emergency rooms. And there are lots of communities and counties across our country that are facing huge budget shortfalls in 2008. And so what my mom has said is that if we could provide a $30 billion lifeline to Wall Street, we certainly should be able to provide a $30 billion lifeline to Main Street. Yeah, thank you very much. Yes. What's my mom's plan on the war in Iraq? Well, my mom has said that she would end the war yesterday, if she could. And I'm really proud that my mom was the first senator, not the first person running for president, but the first senator to actually ask the White House what its plans were to end the war. She wrote to the Secretary of Defense a long time ago now, and she said, "What are your plans to end the war?" And he wrote back and said he didn't have to tell her. Which is a pretty classic reaction from this administration. Even he knows that, who asked the question. And then she wrote back and said, "You do have to tell me." Which is pretty classic for my mom. And then they said they didn't, and she said they did. That went back and forth. And then she reminded them of the Constitution, and that because she's a member of the Armed Services Committee, they did have to tell her. And I only know what she said publicly, but in that hearing they held now a long time ago, they talked about a lot of things, but planning to end the war wasn't among them. And then President Bush was in the Middle East earlier this year, and while he was there, he said he could see us being in Iraq for 10 years or longer. And he mentioned something a couple of weeks ago that he's been saying now on and off for months, which is his intention to bind the hands of his successor, whomever his successor would be, to force his successor to keep troops in Iraq. My mom was the first senator to speak out against that and introduce legislation back in December to prevent the president from doing that. And then we saw General Petraeus, who's the commander of the American forces in Iraq, testify in front of my mom on the Armed Services Committee a couple weeks ago. And he couldn't answer her questions about what the administration's plans were for Iraq or to end the war. So now we have lots of data points that the administration is not planning on ending the war. So what my mom has said is that immediately upon taking office, she would convene her Joint Chiefs of Staff and her security advisors to begin planning to withdraw our troops and their equipment, begin planning to ensure that we can guarantee safe passage out for the more than 100,000 American civilians who are now in Iraq, working in our embassy, working in charity or aid or business. And then there's a third group of people that my mother's the only person running for president I ever hear talk about, which are the more than 3,000 Iraqis who've sided with us. And whatever you think about the war, we have a moral obligation to the men and women who help keep our men and women safe. And my mom's been pushing the Bush administration for years, literally, to set up a refugee program for those men and women and their families, and they've done nothing. So we have to ensure that we're honoring their service as well. Talking to her security advisors, they say it would take 60 days to begin planning to do all of that. So when you hear my mom say that within 60 days she'll start to withdraw our troops, that's where that comes from. Simultaneously, so we have to send a strong signal to the Iraqis that they have to make what are fundamentally political choices for themselves. There are no military answers to questions like, what do they want their country to look like? How they divide their oil revenues to support that vision. But we should be doing a better job diplomatically, my mom believes, of supporting Iraq while it answers those questions. So reaching out and working with the Iranians and the Syrians, something that she's been advocating for years, so that we're building a climate in the Middle East that helps support a strong and democratic Iraq. Now, she doesn't believe as president she should go to Tehran without preconditions, but she absolutely believes we should be working with the Iranians to support Iraq. And she knows that we need a president from day one whom helping deliver, finally, a peace between Israel and the Palestinians is a priority. When President Bush was in the Middle East earlier this year, it was his first trip as president to Israel. And so we need a president who has a strong record of supporting Israel, as my mom does, and is also fundamentally committed to, from day one, doing whatever we need to do to help achieve a final peace between Israel and the Palestinians. Because we know that we'll never have peace or security in the Middle East or anywhere in the world until we have a peace between Israel and the Palestinians. And then something else that's really important to my mom is to make sure that we're getting back to the type of development programs that we know work from the 1990s, and that we're building more friends and allies in villages, in small towns, and in big cities, not only in the Middle East, but also around the world. That we get back to more microfinance and microcredit programs. Those are the programs where the United States lends small dollar amounts to entrepreneurs in the developing world, so that people again see us, the United States, is standing up with them for their dreams. And one thing that's really important to my mom, that she advocated as First Lady, and that she has been working on in the Senate, but which she hasn't even been able to get passed through a Democratic Senate, but which is really fundamental to what she wants to do in the world, is to finally get rid of school fees. Well, why is that so important, and how does that relate directly to your question on Iraq? There are a lot of places in the world where families have to pay to send their kids to public school. Well, families are less likely to send their kids to school if they have to pay. That makes sense. But families are still likely to send their kids to school. It's just that they're likely to send kids that look like you and not like me to school. They're very unlikely to send their girls to school. And we know that where girls are educated, not only are women more likely to be enfranchised, but development is more likely to occur more quickly. Democracy is more likely to take root and be sustained. And ultimately, the United States is more likely to have a friend and ally in power. That's what I want from my president. I want someone who understands that absolutely we have to end the war, but we also need to quickly help build a better world in the Middle East and around the world for us, but for all of the world as well. Thank you for your question. Oh gosh. Yes, ma'am.
What's Mom's plan so that when I get to the point where I'm living there instead of working there, that I will have Social Security?
What's my mom's plan for Social Security? There's an incredible awareness about the challenge that Social Security is facing. I was just in Salem at a middle school, and a student asked me what my mom's plans were for Social Security. I've now had a 7-year-old in a different state just look at me with terror in his eyes and say, is Social Security going to be there when I need it? And I'm like, how old are you? But there is just this remarkable awareness about the challenges that Social Security face. And the reason Social Security is in a perilous state is the same reason that Medicare is actually in more of a perilous state. Because President Bush has been borrowing from both Social Security and Medicare just to keep the lights on. You know, President Bush inherited a $5.6 trillion projected surplus and is expected to leave office with a $9.3 trillion projected debt. And the budget that he proposed to Congress last month has a $400 million deficit in it. So even in his last year in office, he's still running all of us into debt. What most economists have said is that if the next president from day one gets back to fiscal responsibility, we'll be okay. Because of where we are demographically, there'll still be enough baby boomers paying into the system. But if we have even 4 more years of fiscal irresponsibility like this administration, then Social Security and Medicare are both going to be in systemic crises, and we'll need government bailouts of an order of magnitude that we can't afford. So it's really important that we get back to fiscal responsibility to balance budgets, and then ultimately a surplus in our budget so we can start paying down our debt. It's one of the reasons that I so fundamentally support my mom, is because of her commitment to fiscal responsibility. My mom's the most fiscally conservative person who's running for president. Everything that she proposes, she tells me as a voter how she'll pay for. Something that's distinct to her campaign, dollar for dollar. Any question that you have about anything that we might talk about today or anything we might not talk about today, please go online and you can see that everything that she proposes, she tells you how she'll pay for. She's also committed to pay as you go, so that everything that she would propose in the future, she will pay for upfront by either closing a program and refunneling that money or changing the tax code. So that really matters to me. One, because I want Social Security to be there when you need it and when I need it. But also two, because it tells me that she's really thought through the details of how to actually get done what she's talking about. So thank you for your question. Yeah. Yes.
I'm a program director for an after-school program here in our county, and we reach about 500 kids, and it's, the kids really need it for a safe and loving place to be. Unfortunately, the Bush administration is cutting funding for after-school programs. I'm just wondering what your mom's plan is to help sustain after-school programs.
It's a great question. So her question, she's an after-school program teacher, and the program that she teaches in supports about 500 kids through after-school programs. And she said the Bush administration has been cutting funding for after-school programs. It's one of the many casualties of its fiscal irresponsibility. And she wants to know what my mom's plans are for after-school funding programs. Well, after-school funding programs increased by 1,000% when my father was in office, largely championed by my mother. And so we saw the largest expansion of after-school funding in our nation's history during the 8 years when my father was in office. And my mother is similarly committed to not only meeting our current obligations, but expanding after-school programs going forward. Yeah, thank you. Yes?
What percentage of tax increase would be expected for the preschool and development?
So what about tax increases? Well, my mom's been very specific about how she'll change the tax code. So it came up actually in the debate last week in Pennsylvania, where my mother said that she'd go back to the higher tax rates of the 1990s on people who make more than $250,000 a year. And she's been very specific about why she believes that's important. Because by going back to the higher tax rates of the 1990s on people who make more than $250,000 a year, that will enable her to extend and expand President Bush's middle-class tax cuts. So an actual decrease in taxes for the middle class, and a radical reform of the earned income tax credit. And the earned income tax credit's been called the greatest poverty alleviation program that we've ever had in our country. It will also enable her to fund everything she wants to do on public school reform, to start public education earlier with 3-year-olds, and what she wants to do to improve public school holistically. So we can talk about that if people are curious. She's also been very upfront about how she'll change the corporate tax code to take away the tax breaks that companies get for taking jobs overseas, something she's trying to do in the Senate already. And taking away the tax breaks that the oil and gas companies received in the 2005 energy bill, which we can talk about, why that's important. She actually is the only Democrat who's still running for president who voted against President Bush's energy bill in 2005 when the Bush administration gave those tax breaks to oil companies when oil was already over $60 a barrel. She delivered that message in Houston, so they know where she stands on that. So there's lots of changes to the tax code.
Why would they decide to tax a higher percentage on people who make over $200,000 a year when they are just starting middle class just to make more?
So why does my mom think that people who make more than $250,000 should pay a higher tax rate? Well, my mom thinks that people who've done well in our country should help build our future. And that, helping fund our public school system is very much a part of that. Yeah. Yes.
I just lost my job. I got laid off, and it was a 3-month-paying factory job to a complicated deal with a Chinese company. So I was wondering what Senator Clinton's plans were for Indiana jobs, and what her plans were for NAFTA.
What are my mom's plans for jobs, and what are my mom's plans for NAFTA? Well, for jobs, one, we need to do a better job of helping keep jobs here, and two, we need to do a better job of investing to build new sectors of our economy. So in terms of keeping jobs here, what we were talking about just now, removing the tax breaks that companies get for taking a job overseas, My mother was the first person running for president to articulate that. I think it's great that it's now the Democrats' position and something they're trying to do in the Senate. To expand the R&D tax credit system so the companies that do research and development here are incentivized to use that research and development to actually build jobs here at home. But we need new sectors of our economy to really rejuvenate our economy and make sure that we're creating new good paying jobs. And then we need to make sure that health insurance is affordable so that we're making sure that our companies are competitive. Because right now, if you listen to GM and Ford, for instance, they'll tell you that they spot their European or their Asian competitors $1,200, $1,500, $1,700 a car because of healthcare costs alone. So what is my mom going to do to invest in building new sectors of our economy? And then we can talk about healthcare too, and then we can talk about NAFTA. Well, in terms of investing in our economic future, my mom sees that as related to combating global warming. And so my mother, when she voted against the 2005 energy bill, she voted against it not only because she didn't think we should be giving tax breaks to oil and gas companies when oil was over $60 a barrel. And sometimes people say, well, aren't you worried if we take the tax breaks away, gas prices are going to go up? Well, one of the theories behind the tax breaks was that gas prices would go down. But I haven't met an American whose gas prices have gone down in the last 3 years. So taking away the tax breaks that the oil and gas companies received and then instituting a windfall profits tax on the oil companies will generate about $50 billion that my mom would use in something she's called a strategic energy fund, something she first proposed back in 2005, so well before this campaign began, because she thought that we shouldn't be spending more on our oil companies, but we should be building an alternative energy future. So what does that mean? Well, one, to help invest in driving down the cost of the alternative energy technologies that we already know work, like wind and solar, so that on a sunny day like today, it's cheaper to capture solar energy and store it to use for a not so sunny day. To invest in new areas of research like geothermal and hydrogen, to invest in answering a couple of key questions, like can we figure out how to deal with the waste from nuclear power safely? Because a lot of people like the idea of nuclear power, but nobody ever wants the waste in their own backyard. And then quickly getting us to true clean coal technology. You know, just doing those things will help create tens of thousands of jobs at our research universities, jobs in the private sector, but also new manufacturing jobs as we're building more solar panels here at home, as we're building more wind turbines here at home. And then one thing that's really important to my mom, and that she's the only person talking about, is helping invest in the long-term health of our auto industry, and seeing our auto industry as really being a partner for a clean energy future through something that she's calling a green vehicular bond, where the federal government would lend $20 billion to our auto industry to help our auto industry quickly make commercially viable the technology that we already know exists to help cars have engines that get 200 mile per gallon gas mileage. You know, that'll be good in that it will help Detroit be a source of new job growth again in our country. It'll also be good because then we'll be able to afford those cars with those engines, so it's a lot less painful if gas stays above $3.50, if we have cars with 200 mile per gallon gas mileage instead of 20 mile per gallon gas mileage. But as much as she is committed to helping our auto industry, and as much as we all know that our cars are sources of greenhouse gas emissions and use a lot of power and energy, our buildings actually use more power and energy and contribute more greenhouse gas emissions to our environment, and my mom believes represent an even greater opportunity to help grow our economy. If we just green the federal government system alone, the 500,000 buildings in the federal government system, if we green the roofs and reinsulated the walls and glaze the windows and change the light bulbs, if we just do what we already know works, we'd cut the energy use of the government by 20 or 30%. We'd cut the energy bills of the government by 20 or 30%, so that's good for us as taxpayers. And we create millions of jobs. And those are jobs that can't be outsourced, because we have to have people right here doing the work. And those are jobs that we would need an electrical engineer to do. And those are jobs we could train a high school dropout to do. And then my mom would work to change the tax code to incentivize businesses and families to do the same, to provide economic assistance to 20 million low-income American families so that they could do the same, and to provide zero interest rate loans to communities like Austin and elsewhere so that we could all do the same and then pay back the government through the energy savings as we realize them over time. So that's what my mom wants to do to help really grow our economy again and make a long-term commitment to having jobs that you can't outsource, that are good paying jobs we have to do right here at home. But healthcare is also a really critical part of this because our healthcare costs are making us uncompetitive. And they're also a huge strain on all of us. Health insurance premium costs alone have gone almost 100% during this administration's 7 years. Costs of various drugs and procedures have frequently gone up more than 100%. So it's not just a moral imperative, but it's a real economic imperative that we have truly universal health care coverage. Well, what does that mean for my mom, and why is it so important that it be truly and not just virtually universal? Well, under what my mom's proposing, if you have health insurance that you're happy with from your employer independently, you can keep it. But if you're unhappy with your health insurance, if you feel like you're underinsured, which I think a lot of us do, as I see a lot of heads nodding, or if you're one of the more than 100 million Americans who at some point over a calendar year is uninsured, because we hear a lot in the debates about the 47 million who are chronically uninsured, but there's actually twice that number who at some point over a year won't have health insurance. Maybe because you're young and you're a student and you don't go to school in the summer, so you don't have health insurance when you're not in school. Maybe because you're young and you switch jobs a lot and you can't afford to buy Cobra during the times when you're not employed. You'll then be able to buy into the Congressional Health Care Plan. And the Congressional Health Care Plan is a little bit misnamed because it's not just for members of Congress and their staffs, but it actually covers the 9 million people who work for the federal government. And there are more than 250 different private options in the plan today, and they cost on average about 75% of what the average employer premium costs because the pool of people is larger. One thing that's distinctive to what my mom is proposing is to say not only can no one be denied coverage because of a pre-existing condition, plans have to offer mental and dental health parity so that they're true healthcare plans. What most health economists have said from Harvard and MIT and nonpartisan academic sources is that under my mom's healthcare plan, the average premium cost would be about 55% of what it is today, a much more significant drop than under any other competing plans. But if you couldn't afford the option that you think best meets your needs or your family's needs, you'll be given a $3,500 tax credit. But more importantly, your maximum monthly premium payment would be capped at a small percentage of your disposable monthly income. So you would never have to pay more than, say, 3 or 5% of your disposable monthly income in helping pay back your loans, pay back your insurance premium. And if you couldn't afford that, you'd be put on something like an expanded Medicare or Medicaid program. But everyone would be covered. Well, why is it so important that everyone be covered? We are more likely to die in our country if you don't have health insurance. You're more likely to not have health insurance if you're a woman. You're more likely to not have health insurance if you're a single parent, a single mother, or a single father. You're more likely to not have health insurance if you're a minority. You're more likely to not have health insurance if your family's from the bottom 25% of family income. I think that's immoral in the United States in the 21st century. And as much as I would wish that people who are uninsured today or who would remain uninsured would never get sick or never get hurt, that's not true. And so when people who are uninsured today get sick or hurt, or when people who would remain uninsured would get sick or get hurt, they go to the emergency room for care, which is the most expensive place in the healthcare system to get care. And today, people, that care has to be paid for by someone. And so what happens is that care is passed on to those of us who are insured through a $700 to $900 hidden tax. And what most economists have said is that if we don't have universal health insurance, if there still are 12, 15, 20 million people who are uninsured and continue to rely on the emergency room for care, we're still going to have to be subsidizing that, or our employers are still going to have to be subsidizing that. And hospitals also bear some of that burden. And every day, practically, my mom meets a nurse or a doctor who tells her how they want to be investing in wellness care, or they want to be investing in more prevention, or they want to be investing in expanding capacity to help care for the baby boomers as the baby boomers age. But they can't make those future-oriented investments because they have to worry about the cost today of caring for the uninsured. So if we want to do what's not only morally right, but also an economic imperative and really help really empower our doctors and our nurses to take care of us today and in the future, we have to have quality, affordable, universal health insurance. And then your question about NAFTA. Well, my mother has said about NAFTA what she said about all of our trade agreements, that she would have a moratorium on new trade agreements from the day that she took office so that she could open NAFTA and our other trade agreements and see what was working and what wasn't working and renegotiate what's not working, renegotiate parts of NAFTA to ensure that we have stronger labor provisions in them, ensure that we have stronger environmental provisions in them, ensure that we have stronger public health and safety provisions in them. That's not only good to help us protect work here at home and help us protect our public health here at home, that's also good because then America is standing up for those values around the world. So that then people see us as standing up for the value of work and the right to unionize and better working conditions around the world. And so that we're doing a better job of not only being, the America that we want to be here at home, but also being the America that we want to see ourselves as around the world. And then one thing that is really important to my mom is to have a trade prosecutor, because we need both stronger trade agreements, but we also need stronger enforcement. Trade enforcement under this administration is less than 25% of what it was in the 1990s, because this administration just doesn't enforce what it doesn't agree with. So my mother has said she would have a cabinet-level trade prosecutor, someone whose job it would be to lead the negotiations of the next round of trade agreements and then making sure that we actually enforce them. It's one of the things that really is important to me when I think about why I support my mom, is that she understands that we need stronger laws, but we also need stronger enforcement and action, and that we have to do both, and we need presidential leadership to actually make sure that all of that is done. Yeah, thank you very much for your question. Oh gosh. Oh, I'm sorry, you've been waving your hand for so long. So her question was, she has a nephew who has autism, and she wants to know what my mom's going to do on stem cell research, and she said she felt like my mom was the only person talking about it. Well, my mother's voted for stem cell research each time it's come up. Unfortunately, President Bush has now vetoed stem cell research twice. And so my mother has said that she would immediately, on day one, ask Congress to reauthorize the bill that was passed in 2007 on a bipartisan basis, and that she would sign it immediately. But one thing I'm really proud of in my mom's record in the Senate is that she's the head of the Autism Caucus. And autism is an epidemic in our country. In 1993, 1 in every 10,000 children born was diagnosed with autism. In 2008, the National Institutes of Health estimate that it will be 1 in every 150. 1 in every 90 boys. And we do not know why this is happening. In 2001, my mom held the first hearing on Long Island to investigate what the likely environmental causes were for what we were seeing as higher incidences rates, either in certain areas of our country or among certain populations like boys. That's true of certain cancers that are more prevalent in certain areas of our country. And it's true of certain diseases or certain conditions like autism that are more prevalent in boys, for instance, than girls. There are other things that are more prevalent in girls than boys. We don't understand why this is happening and why it's getting worse. Unfortunately, President Bush has either flatlined National Institutes of Health funding or actually cut National Institutes of Health funding. Thankfully, my mom has been able to get increases in funding every year for autism research and autism treatment and autism support in our public schools, but we know that we need to be doing more, not only to help support children and families with children who have autism, but also holistically. And so my mother has said that she would increase the NIH budget by 50% within 5 years and double it within 10 years, because we need to be doing more in basic scientific research and understanding how to translate that research very quickly to detection and research into how to really treat people and help support not only people but also families. So thank you for your question. Oh gosh, yes ma'am. Oh gosh, ma'am, well I hope she has that choice. She wants to know if Evan Bai is going to be my mother's running mate, and I said I hope she has that choice. Well, I don't take anything for granted. I'm going to talk to as many people as I can here in Indiana and North Carolina and West Virginia and Kentucky and South Dakota and Oregon and Puerto Rico and all the places who have left to vote about why I so strongly believe my mom is not only the best candidate for the Democrats, but would be the best president. And so I hope that she has that choice. Thank you. Yes, sir, in the Colts. What's my mom's stance on gun control? Well, one, my mother supports the Brady Bill, but believes we need to have a unified system of background checks, partly because of what was exposed to be a flaw in the Brady Bill system by the tragedy at Virginia Tech, where someone who'd been in a mental institution in Virginia was able to drive across state lines and buy a gun. And so my mom thinks that we need to have a stronger system of background checks across our country so that someone who was at a mental institution in Indiana couldn't drive into Illinois and buy a gun and then come back to Indiana. So she supports expanded background checks, and that would be a universal national system. Otherwise, she supports what we have in New York State. In New York State, we have different gun control laws for New York City versus upstate New York. I think a lot of people think that New York is just New York City, but actually the majority of New York State, not just the majority of landmass, but the majority of people live in upstate New York, not in New York City. And we have different gun control laws in upstate New York than we do in New York City, because as someone who lives in New York City, we need different laws than what people who live in communities that absolutely value fishing and hunting, whether those be the places that I grew up going to a lot in Arkansas or the places that my mom now represents in New York need. And your concern was something that was really voiced in 2000 when my mom first ran for the Senate. And what she said then is what I'm sharing with you all now. And she overwhelmingly won support in upstate New York when she was reelected in 2006, because people saw that she respected the right of hunters and also really supported more rural and farming communities than I think anyone would have ever expected. Yeah, thank you. You're pointing to someone? Oh, yes, ma'am. Are you pointing to the woman in pink? Yes, the woman in pink.
I am a cancer survivor, and I have insurance. I'm lucky. I've got a job with insurance. However, my bills are so big that I'll be lucky to ever get them paid off. I pay every month. I pay out of every paycheck. But I have a big concern on the cost of my treatments, and the treatments should be more affordable. What do we do there?
It's a great question. So she asked, she's a cancer survivor, and she asked about the cost of her treatments. And it's a great question because what you express you're confronting with your cancer treatments is what so many people who have chronic illnesses confront. More than 2/3 of the drug costs or the treatment costs in our country every year are borne by the small percentage of Americans who have chronic diseases. So the cost of drugs and the cost of treatments are disproportionately borne by people like you. And so my mother believes we need to radically reform the way we think of both drug and treatment costs in our country. My mom voted against Medicare Part D, and she voted against Medicare Part D. Some of you are nodding, some of you are looking at me a little bit in bewilderment. Medicare Part D is the so-called prescription drug benefits program that is attached to Medicare, what my grandmother, who's 88, has, what I'm sure a lot of our seniors here have. And my mom voted against Medicare Part D because she didn't believe it was a real benefits program. Because the way Medicare Part D works is that it helps our seniors buy drugs up to an arbitrary dollar amount, and then it cuts off coverage altogether. The same is true of treatments. And then people have to pay out of pocket. And then just about when people have bankrupted themselves, people are picked up again and assisted in buying their drugs. That's a so-called donut hole that maybe you've heard about. But there's nothing sweet about being on any side of Medicare Part D. So my mom voted against Medicare Part D, not only because she didn't think it was a real benefits program, but also because she believed that we should be empowering Medicare and Medicaid and the Congressional Health Care Plan with the same authority that the Veterans Administration has, which is to negotiate bulk drug discount prices for drugs and for treatments. Because if we do that, we'll get a much greater volume discount. Now that'll benefit people not only who are in Medicare and Medicaid or the Congressional Health Care Plan, but it'll also benefit those of us who are taking those same drugs because there'll be more competition in the system. My mom also believes in thinking about just drugs, that we should legalize the reimportation of American drugs that have been made to American standards in American labs somewhere else in the world. Now this is really important to her as a senator who represents New York, because she has a lot of constituents who live in upstate New York who can literally see cheaper drug costs across the border. It's just not legal for them to go and get their prescription filled there today. So making sure that we legalize that and then expand the R&D credits for generic manufacturers so that there's more of an incentive for the quicker development of generic alternatives for drugs and treatments, so that there's real competition in the system so that all of our drug and treatment costs go down. It's particularly important for people who are suffering with or dealing with chronic illnesses. Thank you very much. Oh gosh. Yes, in the blue. Yeah. How old are you? You'll be 18 next week. Well, I think from all of what we're talking about, right, making sure that life is more affordable for us in terms of lower energy costs, lower healthcare costs, making sure there's a good job for you, whether you choose to go to work right out of high school or whether or not you choose to go to work after college. But there's something that we haven't talked about that is not only really relevant to you if you're thinking about going to college or graduate school, but is also really relevant to me at 28 with a lot of my friends who are still struggling with the cost of having gone to college and graduate school. And it matters to me that when my mom is talking about higher education, affordability, and accessibility, she's talking about higher education, affordability, and accessibility, both college and graduate school. Because it's really important to her that people be able to not only afford to go to college, but afford to go to graduate school and then afford to pursue our own dreams when we get out of school. So what is my mom proposing? Well, one, the Pell Grant maximum was raised to $5,400 because of legislation my mom helped write that the president finally signed in the autumn. But she thinks that's just the first step in what we need to do to radically reform higher education accessibility. So she wants to double the Pell Grant maximum to $10,800 and expand eligibility so that more people can apply for and receive Pell Grant dollars. She wants to double the Hope tax credit, something I'm really proud of my dad for starting, to $3,500 and extend that to graduate school so that you can use more of your own money if you're putting yourself through college, or your family can use more of their money if they're going to help you to put you through college or graduate school. To expand AmeriCorps, something I'm really proud of my dad for starting, so that more people can participate in national service to earn money to help go to college or graduate school, and to raise it to up to $10,000 per year for up to 2 years, so a total of $20,000 to help pay for college or graduate school. And one thing that's really distinctive about what my mom's proposing, and she's the only one talking about, is to have the federal government get back in the business of direct student lending. So the federal government is the lender of first resort. And to cap interest rates at less than 3.5%. And then to ensure that people can take advantage of the same program that my mom took advantage of when she got out of law school, to pay back their loans as a percentage of their disposable monthly income, so that people would never have to pay more than 15% of their disposable monthly income and paying off their loans. That's really personal to my mom, because when my mom went to law school, she borrowed money directly from the federal government at 2% interest, And she was able to pay back her loans as a percentage of her income when she got out of law school. And that was as important because that enabled her to not only fulfill her dream of going to law school, but also fulfill her dream of going to work for the Children's Defense Fund when she got out of law school, to go to work on behalf of abused and neglected kids, something she never could have done if she'd had to worry just about making enough money to help pay off her debt. And that would be retroactive to help people who are my age who are struggling with the cost of debt so that they could pay a percentage of their income so that they didn't have to make professional decisions based on whether or not they were going to make enough money to pay off their debt. And what I find also really exciting about what my mom is proposing is to say to people, if you're willing to do a job that's in the public interest when you get out of school, if you're willing to work in an after-school program, if you're willing to be a teacher, if you're willing to be a nurse, if you're willing to be a doctor in a rural area, if you're willing to be a volunteer firefighter, if you're willing to be a police officer, that service itself will count as payment in kind to help you pay off your loans. And then if you have debt after 20 years, it will be forgiven. And so what she's proposing is just so much more progressive and comprehensive than what anyone else is talking about. And it is relevant for people who are looking to go to school and also people who are in school or who are maybe out of school. And one thing that my mom is trying to do now in the Senate is to make it easy to apply for aid, because it should never be difficult to apply for aid. So she's trying to get rid of the FAFSA form and replace the FAFSA form with a checkbox, so that your family or you, if you're applying directly for yourself, can just check a box on your tax form, and the government will send you the level of aid that you qualify for. That's also good for us as taxpayers because it costs the government billions of dollars every year to print and administer and process the FAFSA forms. So that really matters to me, that my mom understands it's not just about college, but also graduate school affordability, and really is committed to ensuring that public service is honored in our country and valued in a very material way to help people pay for college or to pay off college or graduate school. So how will she pay for this? Because this would radically revolutionize the way we think of higher education affordability. Well, back to the question about taxes. President Bush has proposed repealing the estate tax altogether. And my mom would preserve the repeal for families with assets of $7 million or less. And that's important because that's most of our family farmers here in Indiana, but also across our country. But she would reinstitute the estate tax on families with assets of more than $7 million. That's 0.3% of Americans, but that would bring back $8 billion into our federal budget every year that's not there today. That would enable my mom to do everything she wants to do in higher education, affordability, and over time enable her to start a National Public Service Academy so that we're making the same level of commitment to public service that historically we've had to military service. So I think on any issue, my mother is the strongest and the most progressive and the most prepared candidate, but particularly when I think about higher education affordability for those who are thinking about going to college or those who are in college or those, like so many of my friends, who are still struggling with the debt from having gone to college and graduate school. My mom is particularly distinctive, and I'm really excited about the prospect of her being our next president, hopefully with Indiana's help. Thank you. Thank you for all your questions. I hope it was interesting and helpful. I hope that you'll all vote on May 6th, or I hope you'll vote early. I hope that you'll all vote for a Democrat, and I hope, of course, that you'll all vote for my mom. Thank you very much. Oh my gosh.
What do you think, guys? All right. All right. Thank you very much. On behalf of the city of Austin, I'd like to present you with this.
Thank you very much.
And basically, that's a token of appreciation from the city of Austin because we do appreciate you coming here.
Thank
And
you
we
very
appreciate everything you're doing.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Mayor. Thank you, everyone.
Philippe, can you email Lauren to come out here?